Joe Haldeman's The Forever War is a book that I find a little difficult to talk about. What stands out for me is not the Vietnam allegory, the combat, the armored suits, or even the element of trying to fight a war with relativistic effects kicking in every time you go anywhere, and the wide disparity of temporal progression that results. Forever War is a case where the heroes of the story, the characters that we identify with, spend their lives fighting for a government that deserves to lose. It's morally bankrupt and strategically inept. The United Nations exploratory force begins with a build-up for war. They don't know how they'll fight it, or why. They know nothing about their enemy aside from that they are the enemy. What do they want? Where are they from? What do they look like? Are they made of meat? Don't know. And it doesn't matter, because the war is the point. And that's why the draft portrayed in the book is so interesting. The Elite Conscription Act leads to the best and brightest of Earth's young citizens being drafted and turned into the most highly educated ground pounders in human history, sent off to fight something. Gone are the days of rounding up illiterate peasants and handing them spears or rifles. Modern war is incredibly complex. Learning to properly use and maintain most modern weapons is a specialized skill set on its own. The book carries this further, with each conscript not only being in peak physical shape, but most having graduate degrees in biology, engineering, or physics. In other words, the very people that humanity needs working on new advances. It's an extreme illustration of how wars steal from the future, in terms of money, of young lives, of potential. You can't have a war without indebting future generations. We follow this particular saga through the eyes of William Mandela, often in the company of Mary Gay Potter, over the course of the next 1,000 years of war with the Taurans. So named because you gotta call him something. It begins in the late 1990s on Pluto's moon, with the highly credentialed conscripts training to build a forward base in similar inhospitable conditions. It's full of amusing little details, like a sergeant waving a 1911 around on Charon. This is an Army Model 1911 automatic pistol, caliber .45, and it is a primitive but effective weapon. 3 world wars. Now, of course, we can expect a man who was drafted and sent to Vietnam to write a book that takes a deeply cynical view of war. But Forever War goes further than merely sending young men off to die in war for dubious reasons. They draft women, too, and not just to serve as soldiers. They draped a few bedsheets here and there for privacy, then unleashed Stargate's 18 sex-starved men on our women, compliant and promiscuous by military custom and law, but desiring nothing so much as to sleep on solid ground. The level of social degeneration implied in that sentence is staggering. When invading soldiers force themselves on women in conquered territory, it's rightly viewed as a war crime. But UNEF requires their own women not only to fight alongside the men, but also to service them in this manner. And it's so universal that no one stops and asks,
"Are we the baddies?"
Of course, I'm not saying that women can't be soldiers, especially as we move up the technological ladder and rely heavily on machines in combat. The physical distinctions become less important. But this is the United Nations engaging in interstellar sex trafficking, which sadly isn't that big a leap. Otherwise, it's typical Army. They train extensively in obscenely cold environments only to be dropped into an unspeakably hot environment on their first real mission. So they slaughter some aliens, and then they slaughter the aliens they were actually sent to kill. It's easier than expected, almost like the Taurans have no idea they're at war. This is aided by post-hypnotic suggestion to instill a genocidal hatred in the soldiers. They kill all but one Tauran who escapes, and then they head out. They have one more battle with the Tauran ship that, due to relativistic effects, is effectively from their future and almost destroys them. But Mandela and Mary Gay survive and return to Earth. 20-some years later, and find a world they don't recognize. Everything sucks, everyone's gay, crime is out of control, and half the population uses ambiguous pronouns. So yeah, pretty much nailed it. It shows us this peculiar world where the entire global economy is shifted toward this incredibly expensive interstellar war, but it's so distant and the time delay on news is so long that the war doesn't really have any direct impact on most people. The most important fact about the war to most people was that if it ended suddenly, Earth's economy would collapse. It drains resources, contributing to the collapse of services and the impoverishment of the population, and it siphons off the most promising into the Army. Any person who showed a shred of talent was sucked up by UNEF. The very best fell to the Elite Conscription Act and wound up being cannon fodder. The Earth is left as this dreary, violent dump of a world. It's not really a civilization anymore. It's all just an industrial and manpower base for the military. The economy is so degraded that even jobs are a rare commodity, trading at inflated rates within their own black market of false identities, subletting shifts, and other signs of failed central planning. But at least the returning vets have a lot of money coming. Combat pay with 20 years of compounding interest. But the government fixes that too. Most of you have something on the order of $400,000 coming to you, accumulated pay and interest. But Earth is on a war footing, and of course, it is the citizens of Earth who are supporting the war. Your income puts you in a 92% income tax bracket. $32,000 might last you about 3 years if you're careful. This whole conscription thing has a whiff of slavery about it. Also, it's not actually dollars. The money is based on calories, but when some bureaucrat figured out that 100 calories of steak costs more to produce than 100 calories of gruel, it gets mired in a ration system with all kinds of loopholes and shifty exploits. Mandela leaves the city and lives with Mary Gay and her family for a while in relatively not awful South Dakota, which I can relate to. But after a brutal raid by heavily armed city folk that kills her family, they decide things are so bad that re-enlisting starts to look good. In a brilliant and perfectly on-point bit of commentary on bureaucracy and the perils of trusting the government, they make sure to get the promises that were made in writing on their contracts, and they are assigned to the moon as training instructors as promised. And as soon as they arrive, they get new orders transferring them to the front. The guarantee, well, we were given our assignment of choice. Nobody guaranteed we'd have the assignment for more than an hour. It's so dirty. I shrugged. It's so army. I know some of you can relate to this. After getting tore up on their second tour, they have to grow back the limbs they lost, and the trends they saw on Earth continue. Two things really stand out to me. First, everyone is drafted into UNIF at the age of 20. Most people work at a desk for 5 years and are discharged. A few lucky souls, about 1 in 8,000, are invited to volunteer for combat training. Refusing is sociopathic, even though it means signing up for an extra 5 years. No more elite conscription. Everyone is part of the war effort one way or another. It's not only the center of the economy, but really the core of human activity. Also, humans don't reproduce anymore. Not only is everyone homosexual and Mandela's archaic interest in women is looked on as weird and kind of perverse, his squad calls him the old queer, but humans are grown in labs at exactly the replacement rate to maintain a constant population level with controlled parameters for social stability. A, people showed a regrettable lack of sense in choosing their genetic partner, and B, the Council saw that racial differences had an unnecessarily divisive effect on humanity. With total control over births, they could make everybody the same race in a few generations. Humans have colonized planets around other stars, but there's no real human civilization, just a homogenized mass of statists marching off to a pointless war. All human activity is one way or another directed toward this war that's been going on so long no one remembers anything else. And humans are entirely dependent on technology, even to reproduce themselves. Forever War isn't a military sci-fi story so much as a commentary on how war corrodes society. There's not much combat in the story. It revolves mostly around the peripheral effects. So Mandela gets promoted to Major and sent back out. This battle really gets into the shield tech they've introduced. They have a generator that maintains a dome of altered space-time. Maximum speed is capped at something like 16 meters per second. There is no electromagnetism, so no power, no comms, no lights, though the haze gray of the dome pervades everything without regard for solid objects casting shadows. Their fighting suits need a special coating to protect them, otherwise their bodies can't function and they instantly die. This shield allows them to survive things like getting nuked repeatedly, and if the Taurans want to force them out, they have to march in there and fight with spears. The whole thing kind of makes me think of the Black Domains from the Three Body series, where civilizations can reduce the speed of light in their local region, thereby trapping themselves in a bubble of weird space and keeping them safe from outside aggressors. In both instances, it's an inherently defensive tactic, one that limits the options of the defenders even more than the attackers. Mandela and his soldiers spend a few weeks in one of these domes, after which the survivors are picked up and brought back to Stargate, the central hub of the human fleet. They are given a book that explains everything they missed while they were away, and they learn that the war is over. More than that, it was all a lie to begin with. The 1,143-year-long war had been begun on false pretenses and only continued because the two races were unable to communicate. Once they could talk, the first question was, why did you start this thing? And the answer was, me. And that lie led to 1,000 years of war. But the peace is not between two civilizations. The Taurans share a single consciousness. They're a sort of hive mind. They couldn't understand humanity, this chaotic mass of billions of autonomous individuals. The Taurans, the book explained, couldn't communicate with humans because they had no concept of the individual. They had been natural clones for millions of years. But humanity was gradually surrendering that individuality. Social structures enforced uniformity, restricting diversity of thought. Genetic manipulation limited biological diversity until finally all of humanity is cloned from a single specimen. Man, it calls itself. There are male and female clones from the same source DNA, so yes, in this context it would be linguistically correct to refer to a female man capitalized. Only when man achieved this shared consciousness, not just a uniform cultural and philosophical outlook, but a true collective mind, were they able to talk to the Taurans, or I suppose the Tauran. And this, I think, is the most profound observation of the entire book, though one that gets comparatively little attention. As we fought the war, we not only lost what we were ostensibly fighting to protect, but we became increasingly like our enemy. By the end of the war, we had become something else. Human civilization was dead. We had transformed into what we were fighting. Because war isn't just fighting, it's a cultural exchange, a blending of societies, a mating. This book illustrates that in a way that few others attempt. The returning veterans, relics of the past, are allowed to settle in colonies, breeder planets they're called, where they can be individuals, reproduce sexually with all the uncertainty it entails, and do creative things that the unimind of man would never conceive. But it's not a civilization. It's a zoo, a genetic failsafe. I only feel that it's necessary as a eugenic safety device. I have no evidence that there is anything wrong with cloning only one ideal individual, but if it turns out to have been a mistake, there will be a large genetic pool in which to start again. At the beginning of the story, mankind has just discovered the means for traveling to other stars, has discovered that there were other worlds that could support life. A future of vast possibility had opened up, an enormous field for the growth of culture and philosophy, for individuals to meet new environments and devise new ideas. And the war collapsed it all into a single development path, technological, biological, and social. Instead of broadening, humanity narrowed, finally ending as a collective mind, simultaneously more and less than an individual. Everything that we could have become, everything that we could have achieved, was destroyed by short-sighted functionaries and war profiteers seeing a way to prop up their own interests for a few more years. And the fact that the story ends with Mandela and Mary Gay reunited, living happily and raising a family on one of these breeder planets, only makes it more bleak, because they have no idea what was lost. They see the war in terms of dead friends and corrupt leaders, and miss that it's the potential of human civilization for all time that's been sacrificed. Which is why I find it difficult to talk about this book. It's familiar in some ways. As an American, I want my country to live up to its ideals, to uphold the principles of liberty and justice, to be honorable and trustworthy, to be the good guys, and to achieve the full potential of a society of free people with new frontiers. But it has a habit of getting into pointless wars, of interfering in others' affairs, causing long-term suffering for short-term gains. Our leaders are too much like the leaders of Earth at the start of the Forever War. They deserve to lose. But what else are we losing in the process? Sometimes people assume that because I despise the world portrayed in this book that I don't like the book. Quite the opposite. I highly recommend giving Forever War a read.